Hello, and welcome to Unco, a podcast about what's unusual in tech. I'm your host, Timothy Buck. This week, I sat down with Carolina Milanesi, an analyst at Creative Strategies and writer for TechPinions. I had a lot of fun talking with Carolina about what we want and what we expect from Apple at WWDC, including Siri as a platform, hardware improvements, Apple in the home, and at the end of the episode, the information scoop that Apple may be expanding NFC to more than just payments. If you're enjoying the show, it would be a huge help if you rated the show over on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want to help me keep Unco around, become a patron over at patreon.com/UncoFM. Hi, Carolina.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's Friday, so it's good. And it's a long weekend this weekend, right? So.
Yeah. So for my listeners who don't know who you are, and even for those who do, can you give a brief introduction of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so Carolina Milanesi. So in case you're wondering when you see my very long name, if it's Carolina or not, it isn't. I'm Italian. I lived in the UK for about 18 years before moving here in 2012. I've been an industry analyst, first at Gartner for about 14 years. And then I went off and did some pure consumer research, heading up the Kantar business in New York. And then I joined Creative Strategies, where you find me now, about two and a half years ago now. And focus has always been consumer tech across the board, anything that a consumer would buy, use, or be influenced by, and then technology that then consumers want to bring into the enterprise. That's where my passion is.
Yeah, and you all may recognize Creative Strategies and TechPinions, which Carolina also writes for, from one of my first guests. I guess he was like third or fourth guest on the show, Ben Beharin. So they are coworkers.
That's right. Yeah, Ben and I knew each other. The analyst world is pretty tight. And so we've known each other for a long time. And, about 2.5 years ago, decided that it was about time that we worked together. And so I joined Creative Strategies to do things a little bit differently than what the kind of larger analyst houses tend to do, and really marry, the knowledge of the industry and maybe a bit more attention to consumer behavior and what drives consumers.
Yeah, and I think I've been following you on Twitter and reading your stuff on TechPinions for a while now, and I think that combination is just really, really interesting. There are a lot of people out there who are just kind of like giving their thoughts the way I do about things, or journalists who are writing about a company and specifically about what things are happening. But that combination of knowing what's going on and also the research into how consumers are perceiving that it's really valuable.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, especially when the market, in some areas is mature, like if you think about smartphones and PCs as an example, and then you have the new stuff coming like AR and VR. And it's true, you can't just go and ask consumer what they want, because a lot of times we don't know. We are consumers too, and it's like, I don't know. Till you try, you don't really know. But you can understand from what someone does with other technologies, or how important is the emotional connection you have to a device. As an example, when you forecast, I've been forecasting hardware for a long time at Gartner, and you have models for price elasticity, you have models for a lot of things, but nobody has, you can't put in a model, I really want this thing. I don't know why I want it, but I want it, and I'm going to pay $1,000 for it, right?
Right, yeah. That's funny. Do they, so is that actually like not in the model, or can you add something into the model for like brand or?
You you can account for things like brand because that has an impact on pricing, and you can account for a little bit the kind of a behavior when it comes to, like where a device fits into a portfolio of products. So we started, for instance, when we were forecasting smartphones and smartphones were changing, we were having a very, without giving all the secrets away, but it was a very dynamic model where we were looking at tablets and PCs and see, okay, if say a consumer is going to buy this product, that is going to affect his usage of this other product. And so, how much he would spend on it is going to decrease because the connection that they have on that product is going to decrease. But that part of, how much the touchy-feely stuff is really hard to put into a model, other than say, usually tech savvy people are early adopters and spend more money.
Right.
It's not an easy job.
Yeah. That is interesting though, the way you explain that, because I think that probably applies today for I guess it definitely applies today, like a person buying AirPods. If they own other things, then that affects their chances of buying AirPods, and so that could be pulled into the model as well. I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the number of people who have iPhones versus the people who don't are much less likely to get AirPods.
Correct. Yeah, if you look at addressable market and even with HomePod, the numbers that were out there, the easiest way to start coming to what an addressable market was like, okay, let's start with how many people do have a subscription to Apple Music, right?
Exactly.
That's your first part. And then you're going to look at, okay, how many people have an Apple Music subscription and they have an iPhone and they have AirPods and they therefore very engaged with music. And they might have that. Or you're going to say, okay, who has Sonos and, already have an experience that is similar, might have already the newer version of Sonos with Alexa in there. So less likely to get there. There are things that you can do to try and project. And then, you also try and get some little things and, kind of stick it on darts on a wall and see where they land. And that's like, oh, that's good enough. It's going to be 7 million. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's really cool that you pointed out the Apple Music side of things, because that was something I wasn't hearing from people. And I kind of mentioned that in a couple podcasts and some things I was writing, is that for me, I got one because I like Apple Music. Like,
right.
All of the people saying like it's not good enough in all the ways, I actually agree with them. Like, there's tons of ways that it should be better, and Siri needs to be better, and all of that. But like, if you use Apple Music, there's not an alternative.
Right.
Like,
and also you appreciate how good it is, right? To buy it and then listen to Spotify, the sound is not the same. Right. Because you're streaming from your phone to HomePod and it's just not the same.
Right.
So, yeah. And then the other part, I guess, is, if you have Apple Music and you're already embedded in a setup at home. We were not, for instance. So we are, Apple Music subscriber. Plus, we've been looking for a while for audio to kind of come into the home, but at a good level, right? And I kind of never bothered with Sonos because I wasn't patient enough to figure out where to place everything. So that, you would have a decent sound. And what I loved was the idea of saying, okay, I can get 2 HomePods and they're going to figure out what my room looks like and feels like, and the music is just going to play and it's going to be nice. So that for me was a great appeal to it. Unfortunately, we're still waiting for that capability. But
and maybe this is just like my home, but I haven't really seen the Siri falling down that much because we use it for so few things. Like, we have Alexas too, around the house, but we use all of it for the same like 10 things.
Yeah.
Right.
And most people do. I mean, that's what our data is showing. It's been growing. So the numbers thing is definitely been growing, and the frequency. So there's definitely some, people are starting to become more reliant on these assistants, but we're still at the very early days.
Right. Yeah. And I think like, I don't know if it's a chicken and egg thing, like they're not good enough, and so because of that I don't use them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But the same thing with Alexa. Like we've had them in our multiple Echoes in our house for a lot longer than we've had a HomePod, and we still only use them for like weather, timers. One thing that Alexa falls down on is asking for the weather in another city that you're not
right.
in.
Yeah,
that
I noticed that.
And like being in the Bay Area, it's drastically different depending on where you're going.
Yeah,
we're in San Francisco, it can be 50 degrees, and then if we go to Petaluma, it can be 85. And so I need to know what it is there, right?
Yes,
and that is one thing that Siri does well. And I don't know. There's just and then the other way around is we didn't put the HomePod in our kitchen because it doesn't do multiple timers, and we have to do that. So I don't know.
It's interesting. It's definitely something that I really would like to see improvement at WWDC this year. I do think that Siri can improve in so many ways. For instance, for music, what drives me slightly crazy with HomePod is that it seems like I have like this split personality disorder. And, if I ask for a song on my phone and then I ask for the same song on my HomePod, I might get a different version of the song. And sometimes it's an obscure version of some kind of, if there's a cover that is in the charts now, instead of getting the cover, you might get the original that is 25 years old and I never heard of. It's stuff like that you're wondering, surely that's where AI comes in, where, you kind of look at the odds and say, okay, she's asking this. It's more likely there's going to be this song that is number 3 in the charts versus this other song that, Rinky Dinky Band made a record of in 75.
Right.
So it's kind of, that is where I was like, I wish that there was more smarts there and the suggestions, for playlists and things like that were a bit more true to the music I listen to.
Yeah, definitely. No, I 100% agree. And that actually kind of gets us into what the topic for the show is going to be, is like, what do you expect from Apple at WWDC? I guess when this goes out, it will be next week. So it's a week and a half out now, I guess. Do you want to just start with Siri? Since that's kind of the big one there. That everybody, I think everyone really kind of realizes that is it needs a lot of work. And if it's not addressed here, then that will be a problem for Apple.
Yeah.
What do you expect to see from them regarding to Siri?
Whenever I talk about Apple, and I'm not trying to get out of answering the question, I will answer. But, what do I expect and what I would like to see might not be the same thing.
Right.
And I also learn that, if I say what I expect, there are more chances to be wrong than not if I say what I would like to see.
Right. Yeah, because you can't be wrong on what you want, but you can be wrong on whether it happens or not.
Well, yeah, although I think Steve Jobs would disagree with that, because he would know what I want is not really what I want. But what do I expect to see? I do expect to see enhancements around Siri. I was already hoping to have more when HomePod launched. Just for how the whole launch went, I had the demo at WWDC last year, but it was sound. We didn't really get to try Siri, and so I always had it in my head, not because of something that they said, but because of how the demo played out, that by the time HomePod hit the market, Siri would be better. And There've been some improvements, and the focus was music, but I think there's so much more consistency across experiences. I think is one, because I think the more consistent experience you get from Siri, whether on your Mac or on the iPad or on a HomePod, the more you know what to expect, the more you're gonna keep on asking, right? Even if it's something simple, but you get to want to interact more versus getting frustrated because the experience you get is different. And the car is another one. I always said that to me, the car experience was the one that really got me to use Siri more, because I didn't want to text and drive. I wanted to really focus on the road. And so, but I am a control freak. So if something comes in, I want to know what it is. And so I was using Siri quite a bit, and it really changed my level of reliance on it. And I really went out of my way to use it more. But there's still a lot of frustration. So, why can Siri not say, so, you're sending me a message and I say to Siri, tell him I'm going to call in 5 minutes. And Siri goes, tell him I'm going to go in 5 minutes. Why can she not understand that the tell him part does not go in the message?
Right.
A human being would understand that, right? It's little things like that, which is not just, and in the meantime, my iPhone is going crazy typing everything because I said, hey, Siri. It's not, it's not just a Siri problem, right? Other assistants have similar problems where they're still very transactional. You ask them to do something, they do it, and then you're going to have to ask something else again. But I think it's time to take this to the next level, and Apple should show more. The perception that people have a Siri behind start not just to be a perception anymore, and especially coming out of Google I/O, where we've seen how far Google is taking Assistant. I think I want more, and I want more also as far as capability linked to other things. And so, one of the things that for me was interesting at I/O was how the assistant and AI started to be two separate conversations, right? So Google was talking about AI and intelligence, and then the assistant, as in the voice part, sometimes would play a role and sometimes it wouldn't, but you still would get a benefit. And I think Apple was actually the first one who started to underline the fact that, the iPhone does a lot of smart things, but they don't necessarily label them AI. And that has changed a little bit. And they talked more about machine learning, and they kind of call out what the phone is learning, right, about you. But I think there are more instances that they could highlight and then get me. They know so much about me because I want them to know about me, because I trust them that, they'll use that to my benefit. And I want to see more of that. I want to see them really drive what they know about me more across devices. And Siri would obviously benefit from that.
Yeah. So do you, back to the question that you didn't want to answer around what you expect, do you actually think that they will do a Siri 2.0, like a big, massive change, or should we expect more of a like incremental update?
I think it's going to be incremental. I'm not expecting a big change. I would hope that, given that is a developer conference, that we'll hear more about how developers can take advantage of Siri, and how Apple was starting to open up only parts at the time to control more the experience. What else are they going to open up from for Siri so that developers can integrate that into their apps? I think that would be kind of what I'm expecting. So incremental improvements, and then more, and I forgot what they call them.
Intense, I believe.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, for Siri, for the developers, because that's the other part, right? Is getting developers to take advantage of Siri.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I'm not sure. The one that a lot of people want them to open up is the audio, allowing Overcast and podcast players and Spotify and stuff like that. But I'm not sure if they're going to do that just for other business reasons. They definitely need to open more intense, right? That's what they call it, intense. Yeah, open up more. I guess for me, everyone's saying that basically the same thing, that Siri is not good enough, and there are a lot of really clear steps that have to be made. So whether or not it's a big Siri 2.0, I just want to see that they're taking those steps, and I hope that they can present it in a way that shows like that they see how important it is. And
correct. I think that's where maybe there is still a disconnect between Amazon, Google, and Apple, where, I think that from Google and Amazon, you see that they think about AI and their assistant as a platform, whereas I don't feel the same is true for Apple. I think that iOS is the platform and Siri kind of sits on top of it. And then goes across, some of the other OSs. I would like to see Siri being able to be in Apple TV, either by connecting HomePod to Apple TV, which theoretically would be possible once AirPlay 2, comes to market, or have it integrated in a new version of Apple TV, which I'm not expecting. But, point is, I think it needs to be seen as a platform, something that will be as important as, iOS and building the ecosystem around iOS was back in the day. And I don't think we're quite there yet with Apple.
Yeah. And I think we see that in what you were mentioning before and how it's disjointed depending on which device you're using it on. It's more... They've treated it as a feature that they can add to each of their devices and not as a platform that spans across all of them.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So if they, no matter what actually changes, if they announce Siri OS or whatever they call it, if they make it clear that they've made that switch and they actually view it as a platform or as something that has the same level of importance as, WatchOS or whatever, then I think that would be a really good first step. And I think that would put a lot of people at ease that they're at least moving in the right direction and they're beginning to communicate it out with the same level of importance as their competitors are.
Right. Yeah, we'll see.
So we've spent a lot of time on Siri, and I think that's because that's the biggest thing that people want to see a lot of change in.
It is.
But do you expect to see any hardware changes or hardware announcements at WWDC this year?
Last year I was convinced we were not going to have hardware, and then other than the HomePod, because the rumors were so, but it was like, okay, this is it. This is going to be that. And then we had a lot last year.
Right, yeah.
This year I'm not sure, because if I look at the products, there are some things that we didn't get last year, which I would love to have. One of which is the keyboard for iPad Pro, an improved keyboard where, I can get backlighting and I can have more of, especially for the 12-inch format, where basically I'm getting a MacBook Air, but is running iOS type form factor. Yeah. Which is not for everybody, but it's something that you see pro user, the people that are really relying on the iPad Pro as their main machine. They have looked at third-party keyboards. And I think that if Apple did something like that, would also help position where they see iPad Pro going, right? They keep on going back and forth as far as, is it a PC, is it not? And what's a PC? The ad was brilliant as far as, what the next generation expects from a computing device. But I still don't understand what Apple thinks that the iPad is. And so that is one thing that I would like to see. And I've said this before, I'm not a big fan of pencil. And I don't know if it's because I have small hands and so this is too long. The weight is not distributed properly for me. So I use it, but not as much as I, for instance, enjoy to use the Surface Pen with Surface. So, options on pencil would be nice. And I know I can go and get a third party, but I don't want a third party. I want an Apple, pen. Is because when they design their products, they put the level of attention and detail that they do. And it's the same with the keyboard. I know I can get a third party one, but I don't want another one because I know that, Apple will look at how thin they can make and they will look at, let's not talk about keys because it's a bit of a sensitive subject at the moment on the Mac Pro. But, they are good at what they do. And so I would like them to pay attention to that. But, the MacBook Air is way overdue to have an update or a statement as far as, is it really dead and we're not going to have an update. So I think there's something that in that computing part where, we might see some upgrades in spec on the Mac side. And I think the iPad Pro is ready for a bump, just because you now have pencil support across the board, even in the cheaper one that came out after the Chicago event. And I don't know that, I think doing it now, it would help with back to school. So it would make more sense to do something like that now than not in September.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good one. I was actually going to ask about because I could see it doing them coming out with the new iPads either now or in September, and I wasn't sure when they'll do it, but it would make a lot of sense for back to school, especially because they seem to be positioning it for students in a lot of ways, especially with that, like what's a computer ad and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because there's less legacy, right? I mean, I have a 10-year-old and she is confused when you say, bring your computer, and she goes, Mom, it's my iPad, and I feel like I'm 75. But it is that, but for her, it's kind of interesting because Surface is a computer for her. So it's kind of interesting how she, kind of separates the two. And a lot has to do with DOS, which is not, she can't explain it to you, but she knows that Minecraft on Surface is a different Minecraft compared to what she plays, which is the CE edition on iPad, and she can do things that she cannot do on iPad. So for her, that is what a computer is, something that allows you to do different Minecraft kind of specifications, if you like. So it's kind of interesting how she explains it. But she, kids have no legacy. They grew up with touch, and funny enough, one of the reasons why she does not look at the Mac as something that she wants to have is because it doesn't support touch.
Yeah.
And so she's not that interested.
and it seems like it's not going to, based on comments coming from Tim Cook and all of that. It seems like the iPad really is what they're going to be pouring. Well, on that subject, if they're really going to be pointing students and younger people to the iPad as their computer of choice, then they're going to need to pour more into the software for it. And we've seen that a little bit in the last couple of years, but is there anything in particular that you would like to see, like productivity-wise or otherwise, for iOS on iPad?
Yeah, I never been, there's some people that have been arguing for an iPad OS for a while, so a little bit of a fork from iOS, and I never believed that it had to be totally different. I think that there are some features that work better on iPad than do on iPhone, and that seems like the approach that Apple is taking too. But from a software perspective, I am fine using Office. I would be even better, and happier if I could use iWork in a reasonable way on iPad. It seems that Apple is not particularly interested to really drive iWork, as far as they could. It was funny to me that we got support for Pencil in Office before we got it on iWork. So, I think that is one area where I think if you want to be all in the Apple ecosystem, there's more that they could do and link with to that. There's productivity and iCloud, integration that could be better. And then I wonder if there's because of the bigger real estate, if, iMessage could be richer. For a lot of people, and I'm sure I say this because it's true, not just because Ben and I do it all the time, but it's part of our workflow. iMessage is part of what we do and how we communicate, and the fact that it's integrated in the Mac helps a lot when we're working. But if there was a richness to it that worked on the Mac and on the iPad, where maybe you can do a little bit more, from a collaboration perspective, I think that would be interesting. I don't know if I need to do it with a separate app or as an extension of iMessage, or if it could separate, okay, on the phone you get these capabilities and on the iPad you get these other capabilities.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think for sticking with with iMessage, iMessage on the Mac could use some work, just giving it a little bit more flexibility and even just catching it up with the functionality that's been on iOS for a while.
Yeah, I agree. It still feels much more like text messaging on the Mac than it does on the phone.
Definitely. So for iOS in general, Gurman wrote back in January that that Apple was going to focus and not what was he saying? He was saying that they're going to focus primarily on stability and not do some of the big moves that they had planned around maybe iOS home screen changes and big UI changes. Is that, apart from that article, I haven't really seen a whole lot about that. Is that something that you're hearing as well and expect to see as just primarily a stability update, or?
That seems what most people are expecting, that this is, a kind of an off cycle, if you like, and the big change will come next year, which, considering how for some people, Face ID has been such a big change on iPhone, maybe it's not a bad move to just not change things too much, right? And get consumers happy and accepting of Face ID and really comfortable with that. And I've been going back and forth if I want Face ID on an iPad, because I think on the phone it makes so much sense. It's so natural. On the iPad, and I know that people point to Windows Hello and say, oh, you have, but that's different because, if I almost think it would make more sense to have Face ID on a Mac before I want it on an iPad, just because with the iPad, you'll have to, kind of hold it in front of your face, which is an awkward thing to do, right. Versus the way that the Mac is open in front of you, the camera is right there, which is why Windows Hello works, right? You walk towards your computer and your face is seen by the camera. With the iPad, unless you really use the keyboard all the time with iPad Pro, but it's not in that position all the time. If you're reading a book or, watching a movie or whatever, you might be holding it on your lap. And so you have that movement, which I think creates more friction than not putting your finger on Touch ID. Of course, if you integrated Face ID, you have more screen real estate. And so, you can make the 10-inch even bigger and the 12-inch even bigger. So I don't know about Face ID, but my point was maybe not changing too much is going to help consumer just to get a higher level of confidence in what they have today. But I was looking at the invite, and I don't know what you think about the invite. I love doing the guesswork of, yeah. I couldn't kind of decide if it was like a pinball machine or if it was like a map because there was a lot of 3D stuff, right? And that's what people started to say, oh, we're going to have a 3D UI and, or maybe it's because it also could be AR, right? There was the idea of being able to see an object, in AR, so you see all the components of it. I don't know. It was fascinating, but I don't know if it was UI or it was just what you will see through the camera or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I think people were thinking that it was. Tim Cook has been saying a lot about AR recently.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's just more doubling down on like adding AR features to iOS, or is there any possibility that there will actually be AR hardware announced, like some sort of glasses where they may do a similar thing to what they did with the HomePod, where they announce it early and then it comes out,
I think
9 months from now?
Yeah, I think it's too early.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. I think that's what everyone's thinking. If it does come out, that would be massive. Like that would. And
I think there's still room to put, like they could put the depth sensing camera on the iPad Pro, right? So that you could start doing AR on the iPad, not just for gaming, but what is fascinating about AR and VR is that enterprises are really, really interested, and they're looking at Microsoft, not just with HoloLens, but with mixed reality, lower end devices, is talking about what enterprises want to do. And of course, although Apple doesn't like to talk about it outside of earning calls, they have been growing in enterprise a lot. And so if this is something that could get the iPad even more cemented into the enterprise, why not? Why not add a depth sensing camera so that, from a consumer perspective, you have our use cases with gaming and so forth, but it also plays into an enterprise, play as well, which is definitely something that we've seen a lot of interest for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that seems like it's the most likely thing, is that they're just going to continue to really lay this foundation for a few years from now, actually having AR specific hardware, but build up these capabilities. And if they can get developers to start using these APIs and improving these APIs over the next, starting a couple years ago and for another few years, then when some sort of glasses come out, then there will be an ecosystem there already.
Right. Which is normally how they do things, right? They prepare the ecosystem before they get the hardware out, which is the way to do it, and a successful way to do it. And to be honest with you, up until now, we haven't seen a great deal on AR. The demo and the gaming. You kind of still wonder, why does it matter? And I think is that chicken and egg of, developers are still not sure what the attraction is from a consumer perspective. Obviously the market, the install base is still limited because you have only the most recent phone that is supporting it. So, you know, you don't want to go full in when you have a low-hanging fruit of the rest of the ecosystem for, you know, normal gaming and normal apps that they can take advantage of. So I think Apple needs to kind of show more of a way as far as what AR can do.
I think that's a good point that I hadn't thought of, is that as time progresses and phones move down throughout the ecosystem and a larger and larger percentage of users actually have a phone that works with this, then that is also prepping, it's prepping the ecosystem.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That makes me more, it makes me agree with you more that hardware is probably not coming out this year.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, with something like that going out too early, it would get their competitors, you know, all over it. So I don't know, you know, with HomePod was different because they were late to the party and, you know, saying they would have a speaker, but you didn't really, you know, have a lot of detail as to what the speaker would do, didn't really give much away. But with something like glasses, you know, Samsung would come out with something in 6 months. You know, it's that kind of thing where you really want to keep the cards close to your chest till the last minute.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think there's anything that they're going to be doing with their other services? With we kind of talked about Siri, but as Apple continues to, in their earnings calls, talk more and more and more about how they're having services growth, do you see them making any big moves with Apple Music or iCloud or the App Store, or maybe adding another like parallel to Apple Music? There have been some rumors around there.
Yeah, I think I do expect them to address the whole developer union thing. And with that, you know, address things like discoverability and monetization from the store. I think that especially for the smaller developers, is becoming harder and harder to be noticed and to make money. And so, you know, I think that Apple always shows a lot of love to developers, right, at WWDC. So I'm hoping that they will address that and they will talk more about not just tools. And I think one of the things, for instance, that the Mac would definitely benefit from is if they went ahead with the idea that developers could, with minimal effort, be able to develop an application that will run both on iOS and macOS, which doesn't mean that there's a merging of the OSs, but just from a tool set and the amount of work that as a developer you have to do, it'll be easier for you to do that, because I think that will benefit the Mac that has not seen the growth in the number of you know, App Store apps that iOS has seen, and it would also allow developers to monetize differently. Yeah. So, you know, I think that that's definitely something that I would expect them to address. And then one thing that developers have been asking for a while is to take advantage of watchOS and take advantage of more native, you know, sensors and capabilities of the watch, so that they can do better apps. And as a watch user, I would like them to be able to do that. You know, I really think that there's more from as a sensor and data that you can get straight, especially around health and fitness, right, that you could get from the watch that would really drive better engagement and higher ROI from a user perspective. So I'm hoping they'll do that. I think that battery life now is less and less of a problem for them, which is what has been holding back you know, having developers just go crazy on the watch, and then the watch lasts, you know, 2 hours. Right. But I think that is getting better, and so they might start to relax a little bit, and we might see more, because I think the watch has been one of those after the big success of iOS and the developers on iOS, they're expecting developers to take advantage of everything that they have in equal way, but they don't. tvOS has not seen the number of apps that I think Apple was hoping, and more importantly, the level, the quality that they were hoping, and I don't either. They really pivoted and having TV to be about apps, but it didn't work. And for Watch is the same thing. At the end, Watch is still mainly health and fitness and notifications, and there could be more that you could do with Watch, especially if you start to think of a world that is watch, glasses, and AirPods. And and so you need to start getting the developers to think this is not like a smaller phone on your wrist. This is a different type of platform.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about what to expect from WWDC, is it is a developers conference. And so there's going to be a lot of focus on things, on positioning these different platforms and OSs so that the developers are building on top of it and increasing the value of this ecosystem. So I hope you're right that they do that for watchOS. I hope they do something similar for tvOS. And back to kind of like the services thing for a second.
Yeah.
Do you think that they're going to have a subscription like in Apple News? There were some suggestions that they may have like an Apple Music style subscription where you can pay a certain amount a month and have access to however many paid publications. Do you think that's the type of thing that they would do?
It's not the place because it doesn't really impact developers. But at the same time, it would be the right time to do it, right? That obviously Tim has been talking a lot about fake news and about data and privacy and all of that combined. They had some articles came out, I think, about 2 weeks ago around how they curate news and all of that, which was interesting because, yes, it spoke to Facebook, but maybe it was a way to start the conversation around, around a new service. And then, of course, they just did the acquisition on the magazine side. And so they need to do something with it.
Right, yeah.
Right. And so, it, like I said, it doesn't seem to fit into the developer's bigger picture, but services is certainly something that is very dear now to Tim Cook. It speaks about it, underlines it every time that we're listening to earnings, and so it would make a lot of sense. How they're going to do it in terms of is this yet another thing I'm subscribing to, or I don't know, is it bundled with something? I don't know yet.
Right, and I could see it. I wouldn't be surprised if it came out at WWDC, but it maybe fits more in the fall. And I could see at the same time, like they're, I don't know what they're calling it, Apple TV or Apple. They already used that name. So, but we know that they've been buying up these different like movies and TV and shows and all of that stuff. So it'll be interesting to see when that is announced as well. And do you think that they'll bundle it all together, like all at the same time, or stagger the launches?
Well, so first as you were talking, I was thinking, the only way would not only way, but it would make a lot more sense to talk about the news app if there was some iPad news, right? So you could link it to that because it's more probably something that people will like, especially from a magazine perspective, to consume on an iPad than on the phone. But to your question about will they lump it all together? No, I don't think they'll do like a services launch where they're gonna have a whole bunch of different things. So it would be whatever fits with a hardware discussion, right? So if they're doing something on iPad, either screen sharing or, something even from just an OS perspective, right, that would make that experience better, and they could link it to it as a showcase of this is how much better this is going to be, then it would make sense.
Yeah.
And for TV, I think, we discussed Siri before, and then there's going to be the content side of things. But I think a lot of people are ready for, having Siri that is ambient Siri on TV, either by being linked to HomePod or a new version of the hardware. I don't know, we need a new version of the hardware. If they just make it work with HomePod, I think they would be better off that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think, unless they just go down market on HomePod and have which I don't really expect them to do yet.
I don't either. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the only move I could see, because it's good, and it's got such a powerful chip in it, and it's not being used really at all. So
correct.
Hopefully they can expand the functionality of that. That's actually a good one. Do you see, because right now Siri is so it's not a platform, would you, if they don't make that step to make it a platform, would you see them improving Siri specifically on the HomePod?
Oh, I hope not. I mean, I really hope that they're going to improve Siri across the board. At the end of the day, what that chip can do on a HomePod, the phone can do it too. iPad can do it too. So why just limit it to that? But, if I look across the board and I'm thinking about more from a hardware perspective, which is the hardware that needs it the most, absolutely is HomePod, because that's the value, right?
Yeah, that's the primary input. So it's got to be good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we kind of talked all over the place, and this is one of those conversations that could go on forever. Who knows? It'll be interesting to see in the couple of weeks when WWDC gets here what actually comes out, and I'm sure we'll end up talking about that at some point on the show as well. But to close the show, what is one thing that you find unusual in tech right now?
You warned me that this was one of our questions that was going to come up, so I had to think about this because it was hard. And I came to decide that what I find unusual is the fact that if you think about tech, we see so much that is so futuristic, right? That if you're thinking about AI and machine learning and VR and AR, it's so out there. But yet we seem to have very little creativity as to how we can use this technology to improve society and come up with different ways of doing things. It's fascinating to me that, you kind of look at VR and, the most exciting thing that Microsoft for quite a while was able to come up with is you can do Excel with VR and you're not going to use your PC anymore. Really? I'm going to go into VR to do Excel. And I think that that's maybe human nature, right? That you go with what you know and how you've been doing things. But I wish we didn't have to be like that. I wish that we would really, take something, assistant and voice is another thing, right? And look at the power that has, not to, we can do the same thing as you did before by typing, but now you can talk. Well, tell me something I couldn't do with typing that now I can do, through voice. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but, I wish there was that really, and maybe we should just ask kids to do it because they will come up with, something a bit more entertaining and wild.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think, I just now saw, and I'm sending you a link to it, just like 2 minutes ago, and I'm going to add this into the end of the conversation, is the information just released a post about Apple and secure wireless chips.
Oh.
So it says Apple is making a significant change to wireless chip on the iPhone that will allow users to more securely unlock doors, enabled with the same technology. So it's I don't know if this is something that would come out next, like at WWDC as like a software change, or if this is the type of thing that would come out with new hardware. But it seems like something they're saying as I like skim the article. It sounds like something that they're already using at Apple HQ. And
I'm sure in the new new building. Yeah.
Yeah, and that specifically for the watch has been something that I've really wanted to see is like if I have the watch on and maybe it would make sense to talk about this at WWDC if they could integrate with all of these people who are making smart home stuff, but also
absolutely
car makers. Like they already kind of have that with the fobs, but like why do I have to have a fob?
When absolutely. Right? When like it's me from the watch.
From the watch. Like that would be huge because right now I have to carry keys primarily because of my car, right? Because I'm definitely going to have that key. And I carry them for my house because it hasn't made sense for me to buy them for my house if I'm going to have to carry keys anyway. But if I could get to the point where like getting into my car or getting into the house or anywhere can be done through the watch, that'd be pretty awesome. So yeah, that kind of like throw that in there at the end. Do you have any thoughts on that? I know you haven't had a chance to read it, but
no, I agree with your take of, the convenience factor. I don't know if they'll be able to integrate it straight away into the watch or if it's just an iPhone first and then watch. It depends on, how big this thing is. But, nevertheless, I think they're hitting on a couple of things. One is the security aspect of it, and obviously Apple has been very clear about how important security for HomeKit is going to be. And actually, we didn't mention it, but I will love them to talk more about HomeKit at WWDC for sure, because I think it's still one of those kind of sleeping, part of the ecosystem. And then the other part is exactly what you say is, there are some behaviors that, this is one of my biggest pet peeve against Ring, the now is Amazon, is every time I walk through the door, I get a notification on my watch and my phone saying, oh, there's movement at the door. And I say, yes, because it's me going out the door. Surely there should be a way for the doorbell to know it's me, right? And exactly the example you're doing about the car too. And it's stupid things like this, right? That get you like, you go like, sorry, it's still a lot of work that we need to do to live in that world, that fantasy world where Minority Report type world. But so this would definitely be an improvement, and then address one of the things that consumers are not too concerned yet. But I think we definitely hear more discussion coming from vendors about security within the smart home, and something that sooner or later something really bad is going to happen. And I'm not talking privacy. I'm really talking about somebody hacking your home, and Apple kind of being ahead of the curve on that.
Yeah, and I think that's the key that Apple could really like buckle down on is this technology isn't really that new as far as like the car, right? Like a key fob lets me into my car. It's not really that new of a technology, but being able to do it on a phone and to be able to transfer phones and buy a new phone and for that securely to move over and all of that stuff is really complicated and has to be handled really well, because if we can do this, then like there are a lot of upsides that you can't do now with keys, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have an Airbnb and you want to let people in, you don't have to like have a lockbox or whatever, or have a code on the door. You can just like send them in the Airbnb app access. And then if they
Correct.
walk up to the door with that app who has access, then they're in. And there's a bunch of really cool stuff that could be built off of that, which makes me think it may make sense to fit at WWDC, but it depends on how. And at the end of the article, like the last paragraph says, the announcement is expected to come at WWDC. So it'll be interesting to see. We haven't really seen a whole lot of leaks apart from the Gurman article in January. But if something like this were to come, that would be really cool.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there for developers for sure. As far as integrated, it'd be interesting to see what Apple wants to do as far, as well as the home, if they want to own that handshake, so to speak, or if it's going to be individual apps that will do that. So say I have, like Ring the doorbell, where does that handshake sit? Is it HomeKit or is it Ring? Because I think that that would be important. And Apple so far with HomeKit, the home app is where they want you to be. They don't want you necessarily to go off and having to deal with all the different apps. And as a user, I don't want either. Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. This isn't we haven't really talked about this much at all in this episode, but this could be a big opportunity for them to both like improve home, and it ties into to really so many things. If they know who you are based on your watch or based on your phone, then there's just a whole lot of opportunities for, like you said, Ring. Like if Ring knows that you're walking out the door because of some secure way that your watch can talk to Ring through an Apple API, then it could improve even like an Amazon device like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Huh. Yeah. So, well, we kind of added that at the end there, but I'm glad we were able to talk about it. I think that's really interesting, and we'll see over the next couple hours and days what happens with that. Where can people find you on the internet, Carolina?
They can find me on Twitter at Caro_Milanesi, which is MILANESI. And then I have a Wednesday column on techpinions.com.
Awesome. Yeah, and you all can find me on Twitter at TimothyBuckSF, and you can find the show at unco.fm. Thanks for coming on the show, Carolina.
Pleasure. Or maybe I'll come back and you can prove me wrong on all the things that I said would happen and didn't happen.
Deal.
Take care.
See ya.